Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to know you're there. I can't really see everybody, but I can see our panelists, so that's a good thing. So my name is Byron Cordes. I am a clinical social worker and a geriatric care manager in San Antonio, but I am also the president of the South Texas Adult Protective Services Community Board. Oh, sorry, I couldn't think of a longer name. So I, along with my co-moderators, Carol Birch and Daryl Greer, who are working behind the scenes, they're monitoring questions. But all of us are happy from the Adult Protective Services Board are happy to have you on today as we talk about collaborative approaches to addressing elder abuse and exploitation. So before we get started, though, I do have a couple of housekeeping rules. All attendees are in listen mode and have been muted. So if you called in, please make sure you also mute your phone just in case sound comes through. Don't place us on hold if you get another call. We might hear your hold music, no matter how good it is. To interact during the webinar, if you can submit all questions into the question panel, should be on a control panel on the side. And throughout the webinar, Carol and Daryl are monitoring those questions. They'll kind of coordinate the Q&A questions at the end. If you don't get your question answered during the seminar, we are working to then get you an answer afterwards. So we will capture that. So today I have the honor of moderating this esteemed panel that we're going to talk about strategies undertaken in Bexar County to educate the public and increase prosecution of offenders who commit crimes against older adults. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my sharing so we can see more of our beautiful panel. There we go. Did my share screen go away? I can't see the same thing. Is it good? Okay. So as I said, I have the honor, if I can find my notes. I should have warned folks, I'm in Boston, if you can see the beautiful brickwork behind me. So I'm not at my normal desk, so I'm trying to work off of 8 different devices here. So so today we have with us, we have Judge Veronica Vasquez, who is the Bexar County Probate Court number 2 and one of the co-creators of this task force. We have Lieutenant Marcus Booth from the San Antonio Police Department and the Financial Crimes Director. We have Sean Hughes, attorney. He's the Senior Vice President at Broadway Bank and the President of the Elder Bar Association, San Antonio Bar Association. You got a longer name than the South Texas Adult Protective Services Community Board. Congratulations. We have Sandy Sullivan from Frost Bank, and we have Ann Cortez, the area director, regional director for Adult Protective Services. So she'll correct me if I'm wrong. I know I'm close with that. She's the senior vice president of district. Thank you, district. See, I wasn't even that close. Okay. And we have Senator Jose Menendez, State Senator Jose Menendez is hopefully going to pop on. He's also one of the co-creators of this task force. So with any luck, we will get him. I know he had a very busy day and was hoping to get on. So with that, I want to thank our panel for coming on with us. We have about 50 folks, almost 50 folks on here. We have attorneys and financial advisors, financial institutions. We have I think we've had a couple of judges on from across Texas. Certainly, you know, our Adult Protective Services here out of San Antonio is considered Region 8, which is pretty wide and broad. There are large regions. There's 11 regions in Texas. But I know we have some folks from even outside our region. So Judge Vasquez, I have the first question for you. If you could tell us about the Elder Abuse and Exploitation Task Force, and can you share the goals and objectives and what the task force is working on?
Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted? Am I unmuted, right? Okay, all right.
You're good.
All right, thank you. So just a little bit about the task force. It was created last year, and the reason why it was created is because the probate court sees a lot of Emergency removal, so that is basically when the state will come in, Adult Protective Services, and they will say, we have to remove this individual, ex parte emergency removal. So basically we need to get it to you in front of you, judge, as soon as possible because this person is being exploited or abused or neglected or whatever it may be. And so then I have to hear what's going on with that individual. I don't think that they have brought a case yet that I have said, not to say that it's not going to happen at some point, but that I have said, no, this is going to be rejected, because oftentimes these are the worst of the worst cases. I see, physical neglect, exploitation, you name it. So they come and they bring those cases before me. And oftentimes those cases will then lead to an application for guardianship. So what will happen is Adult Protective Services with the DA will come in and say, we need to remove Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones is being, she's living in feces, is bedridden, her drug addicted nephew is taking money from her, whatever it may be. And at that point, I will grant the emergency removal for them to be able to remove her from the home and place her into a safe situation. During that process, Adult Protective Services will oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes get the process rolling to either work with Health and Human Services to obtain guardianship over that individual, incapacitated person, or work with a family member to then apply for guardianship over that incapacitated person. My concerns were we would see APS would do their investigation and they would validate on these individuals. They would meet the civil standard for Adult Protective Services, basically saying, yes, this person is in fact, the perpetrator is, we have enough evidence to say that we're actually validating on them that they are abusing or neglecting or whatever grandma. So then my next question would be, well, what's happening at that point? And nobody seemed to know what was happening on the back end. Because Adult Protective Services, they're focused on removing those people from those dangerous situations, right? And then placing them into a guardianship. And then at that point, we kind of weren't sure what was happening on the other end. And it was a similar problem that Senator Menendez in his office and his constituents were expressing concern for to the senator. So we got together and we talked to Adult Protective Services and we talked to all the stakeholders and said, let's have a meeting to find out where everybody's at, what's happening in this process, what is the actual process. So the first meeting we had, I want to say it lasted about 2 or 3 hours. It was a very long meeting. Every meeting that we've had lasts at least 2 hours because there's so much information and there's so much good information that everybody needs to share and kind of what's going on. So the first initial meeting, we had Lieutenant Booth and we had other members of the San Antonio Police Department, Adult Protective Services. We had the financial institutions, Sandy, Sean. We also had practicing attorneys, because that was another thing is, in addition to seeing these cases that come before the court and asking what was going on, practitioners were coming to me and saying, Judge, we're expressing a concern because we're seeing a lot of these cases and we're not seeing the prosecution of them. We're trying to figure out what's going on. So it was I was not only seeing it, I was hearing it. And so at that point, we decided, let's have a meeting. So at that meeting, it was a very productive meeting. We kind of figured out, charted out what the process was, where there could be improvements in the process. And I'm happy to say that the major stakeholders like the police department, APS, they were talking about those things and actually meeting on them. After this meeting, let's have monthly meetings and talk about where we can fill those gaps. And so that was the initial concern. Since COVID, we haven't been able to meet. We do actually have a meeting tomorrow because session is starting in January and the bill filing is starting in November. And so the hope for tomorrow is for us to meet to get everybody's ideas about what's going on. But not only that, do you have any ideas for the upcoming session to share with Senator Menendez on how we can improve this process? So that's initially where it started. And again, unfortunately, because of COVID, we kind of got thrown off of things, but we're going back on track because this never stopped. It never ends. And in fact, the probate department, our courts are actually seeing an increase in the filing of emergency removals. We're seeing an increase in filing of 1102s, which I will talk about later. It's a really important process in this whole thing of elder abuse and exploitation. In addition, we're also seeing a lot of temporary guardianships that are filed in our court. So this is something that's not stopping. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of these filings in our court that often have to do with elder abuse and exploitation.
Yes, thank you. And I think, and you hit on something that, I think some of the reporting went down when COVID first started, but we know that the abuse and neglect and exploitation has never stopped. And I think
Right.
now, unfortunately, we're seeing the fruits of that silence, perhaps. So, Sean Hughes, it's my understanding that you were designated as the chair for the legislative committee, since Judge Vasquez was talking about our every 2-year session is just starting up in Texas. Can you share what the priorities are for that committee right now?
Sure. And first of all, I want to just give a huge shout out to Judge Vasquez for stepping into this, just for continuing to see the need from the bench and not like just saying, oh, that's SAPD, oh, that's APS, oh, that's the attorneys, oh, that's anybody else's fault. She said, let's bring everyone together because this is a community issue. And, one of the things I think about is on the legislative committee, if you back up and think, what does a legislature do? Well, the legislature writes and passes laws. But in order to write and pass laws that are for the common good and that are effective, you have to back up first and really listen and really bring everybody to the table and really seek to understand. And so I just feel like that's what's happened. I'm so proud of our community at this point because we've had representatives from so many various agencies that cross paths with elder fraud and exploitation. And without exception, every one of them has come to the table and said, what can we do? How can we be a part of it? How can we have an honest conversation about the breakdowns in communication and how we're helping do our part to prosecute elder fraud and exploitation? So that's been really big, just the coordination and communication piece. And so I'll be honest, the legislative committee is taking a look at the primary statute from the penal code that is the lead statute for prosecuting elder fraud and exploitation, but really bigger than that. That's a little bit technical right there as far as the prosecutorial standards. But even bigger than that is really bringing everyone to the table. In fact, tomorrow I have a call with the District Attorney's Office, Marcus Booth from SAPD, and Sebastian Gill from Adult Protective Services. Again, really just talking through how are the agencies communicating, what are the breakdowns in communication. And so a couple of things I'll tell you is in the legislative committee, so I kind of, like you said earlier, I kind of wear 3 hats. One is that I'm chair of the legislative committee, and so I'm really trying to look at the legislative piece. Number 2, that I work with the elder bar, the probate bar, on behalf of the elder law section. And then the other thing is I represent a local bank here in town, and we're very committed as a local bank to doing our part to not only just respond, but to elder fraud, but to try to prevent it. And I'll give another shout out that really all of the financial institutions stand on the shoulders of Sandy Sullivan, who's on our call today, who has really gone before us and done this for years. And so, so I would tell you, Byron, we're looking at the processes. We're looking deeper than just passing a law, because if we can submit language for some changes in the legislative authority on prosecuting, that's one thing. But we also have to really look down to nuts and bolts of, if we get some changes passed, is the system, is the protocol, are the people in place, is the understanding that everyone's going to cooperate to work together to actually bring charges to fruition and prosecution that will serve as a deterrent. And so that's really how we're trying to look at this in a much more holistic manner.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Lieutenant Booth, I know as Sean and certainly Judge Vasquez were talking about creating this strong network and this kind of the interrelationships between the systems, between state, local agencies. So involved in identifying, investigating, and prosecuting elder abuse and exploitation. Can you tell us what SAPD has done, what kind of steps they've taken towards that goal of identifying, investigating, and prosecute, and then helping to prosecute? And what plans maybe you guys are looking at to the future because of this task force?
Uh-oh.
I think you may be on mute, Marcus.
Better?
There we go.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, looking to the past, it's been probably 3 years ago, we put together a financial fraud group that is law enforcement here regionally and bank fraud professionals. That's called the Bear Financial Fraud Group. So that's been a good communication platform. And it really has, kind of regionally, it's really increased communication related to fraud, elder fraud, and anytime you can get law enforcement and banks discussing these things and sharing information, that has helped quite a bit for us. We try to go out and do training with the banks, and specifically with regard to elder fraud sort of things. I don't know, Sean, I appreciate you making that comment about Sandy. I think we all, I hate to say this, Sandy, but I think we're all standing on your shoulders here with regard to some of this elder fraud stuff. Sandy's been fantastic, and Broadway as well, by the way, with Sean. Kind of helping us understand how the banking system works and what sort of things we need to be doing as a police department, who we need to be talking to specifically at these banks to make sure we get on top of these fraud issues. Sandy has just been critical with that. Another thing, kind of moving forward and trying to improve with the communication. I appreciate again with the judge getting and the senator kind of getting the task force rolling. We already had a very good relationship with the DA's office, and that's been ongoing for many years in multiple administrations. And these, I think everybody here understands that these legal issues, specifically with regard to elder fraud, are really complex. They can be difficult and time consuming. So trying to run them into a regular court and through a regular prosecutor who's seeing a huge caseload is maybe not the best idea. And the DA's office has been super responsive with that. We've had special prosecutors assigned to these things that are really up to speed and are willing to take the time and work with us through some of these cases and complex legal issues. So I think that's been really critical for us, is the communication between us and the DA's office. Kind of moving forward, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but I really want to start focusing on the, obviously we're trying to improve our processes and procedures with what we're doing right now on elder fraud, but I really would like to expand on our public contact, both to potential victims and to caregivers of potential victims, so that we can get the prevention side operating for us and working better. And obviously the more of these elder fraud cases that we can keep out of the system in the first place, the better off we're all going to be.
Excellent, and I agree. And so speaking of Sandy, who you, with all of this weight on your shoulders, that with all these people standing on your shoulders, I think Sandy was only about 2 feet 6 inches, but she's a giant. She's certainly a giant in the community, and started doing this when I don't even know, Jesus was walking the earth. Maybe that makes you sound old. She started when she was very, very young, but Sandy is before. So Sandy, can you tell us maybe what you've seen in the kind of in the banking industry? And I know you've been doing this for many years, so that may be hard to condense down, but and then just maybe what opportunities. I know there have been some recent legislation in the last couple of years about giving banks a little bit more power, and maybe some oversight into what they can do to help protect our seniors. But what maybe do you see some opportunities in banking?
Okay. I have been doing or handling the fraud for the bank for 30 years now. So in the very beginning, elder fraud was not that significant. We didn't see a whole lot of it. A lot of people, of course, weren't reporting it. They didn't know that they could report it. There was misnomers about what adult protective services can and cannot do, and that still is in effect today. A lot of people that don't understand that. But starting probably about 20 years ago, the elder fraud started increasing. We started seeing a lot of it. And so I chair a group, used to be called the SWACHA Fraud Reduction Group. Now it's a ePay Resources Fraud Reduction Group. And we bring together financial institutions and law enforcement and other agencies like Adult Protective Services and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the DA's office and whatever together. And we share information about fraud. And so elder fraud is very near and dear to my heart. I, at a very early age, had to deal with 2 parents that were a lot older when they had me. And so I went through a lot of things with them at a lot earlier age. And I was very close to my parents. So it became very significant to me to take care of seniors. And so we were seeing a lot of it at the bank. And so I was reaching out to different entities to find out how could I get help for my customer. Who could I go to file a case when I had something, were there services out there? And so I started talking at our ePay Resources meeting, our every other month meeting with everybody, just trying to educate them. This is what I'm seeing. What are y'all seeing? What kind of things are you doing for your customers? Are you filing APS reports? Are you going to the judge's probate court? A lot of people don't know that they can file things through the judge's probate court on different things. So, a lot of times I might file something with APS as well as with the judge's probate court, just depending on the volatility of what's going on with the customer. And what's needed immediately. And so just going out and educating people to understand it's their duty as a person, morally and ethically, to help our seniors to make sure they're protected. And so I always say there should be a bumper sticker out there that says, in your golden years, it shouldn't be hurtful to get older. It's too long of a bumper sticker, but seniors or older individuals are just like children. They need help, and sometimes they don't know how to reach out, for that help themselves. And maybe it's a family member, and so that family member is, they don't want to hurt them or get them sent to jail, or they've, been told that they're going to be set on fire or they're going to be hurt or whatever and stuff. So they need somebody there, to be able to help them out. So it's just, I think there's a whole lot of room out there to educate people. So, on the Adult Protective Services or the APS community board that I'm on, along with this task force, one of the biggest things is education. It's educating the public, not just our seniors, but educating their children behind them and their neighbors and everybody around them to understand about, what is exploitation. Just because you're on somebody's account doesn't mean that's your money. Even though, they've allowed you to sign on the account, doesn't mean that you get to take their money. So right now we have a case that just arose yesterday. It's a huge amount of money that a daughter alleged that her mother was dead, and has taken a very large sum of money from her mom and stuff. And it just, makes you crazy and stuff. So, I kind of believe that in the movie Ghost, the black demons can suck people to hell. And so I hope sometimes on these people that exploit the seniors or hurt the seniors, that at least God will let me watch a couple of people get sucked to hell before he takes me and what have you. But it's a huge problem. And so educating law enforcement, educating, the public, educating attorneys, educating doctors. One of the biggest things right now is there's a tsunami coming, and not one industry is ready or prepared to take care of the number of seniors they're getting to roll over, or people that are getting to roll over into that senior group. We're no longer in the 1950s where, everybody kind of lived together. Now everybody's scattered. So, you could have a parent that lives here in San Antonio, but their kids are in Washington, D.C. or Europe or whatever. They make phone calls to their parents. They think everything's okay, and it's really not. So, I think education, PSAs, any way that you can educate people, because everybody learns differently. But, to me, that's the big thing, sharing information and learning how to do things better. And so that's what Sean and them are going to be able to do with the legislative things, is talking to people what things can be done, should be done, what things are you seeing? And so I think we've learned a couple of things in a couple of our meetings that just kind of overwhelmed us about the fact that we didn't realize that there are issues in some of the legislative terminology that allows certain things to happen where we can't protect the senior. So
Yeah. That's great. That's excellent. Thank you, Sandy. And your name does pop up all the time, by the way, just to reinforce that we're working on a new client. Yeah, we've got a new client yesterday where your name was brought up. So Judge Vasquez, I'm going to throw this out to you, and Ann Cortez, you might be prepared to jump in on this too. So Judge Vasquez, since elder abuse is still underreported, can you share some ideas that the task force is working on to educate the public, as Sandy said, which is very important, that education, and what types of education need to happen to increase awareness so that communities can be better equipped to address elder abuse, exploitation, and
So a couple of things. But right before COVID happened, Sandy, myself, Senator Menendez, and Lisa Brown with Adult Protective Services went on NPR to speak to what I can't even remember the name. Anyway, the name of the show, but it's to basically just tell the public about elder abuse and exploitation. I think the more that we can get out there, we also had something on KSAT. I know we've been in talks, and I talked to Ann Cortez because KSAT has reached out to find out if COVID has affected any of the numbers, and so we need to get them that information. But the more that we can advertise it as far as getting the information out there, because I think a lot of it is just not understanding. What we see in the probate court, particularly, and even with attorneys, I have to educate them when I do CLEs on guardianships, that it's a mandatory reporting state. You don't have an option. It's like child abuse. If you see it, if you believe that it's going on, you're required by law to report it. There is no exception because you're a doctor. There is no exception because you're an attorney. If you hear about it, you're obligated to report it. So oftentimes what will happen in the probate court, and even when I was a private practitioner, the client will come in and say, my brother or sister is stealing all of mom's money. She has Alzheimer's, dementia. The first thing that I would always say was, have you reported this to Adult Protective Services? Because I guarantee when you come in my court and you make those accusations, I'm going to ask the same thing. I'm going to ask if you've reported it to Adult Protective Services. If it has not been reported, and my court investigator also, that's the first thing she's going to ask is if it's been reported to Adult Protective Services. If it has not been reported, we are required by law to pick up the phone and call Adult Protective Services and to report it ourselves. So it's educating the public that it's not something that you can just make an accusation and say brother's stealing and then do nothing about it. You're required by law. Again, it's like a class A misdemeanor up to a felony, state jail felony or something like that, right? And I know it's a felony, but I can't remember if it's anyhow. But you're required to report it. And I think it's just that educating, because once I tell people, even when I talk to banks or whoever it may be, it's mandatory reporting. You start then seeing people, oh, okay, it's clicking. And I've had attorneys come up to me and say afterwards, how long does that apply? Can I go back and yes, go back and report? And I always tell people, even if you are not sure, even if it's a hunch that you've got, just go and report it. There is nothing wrong with reporting it. If Adult Protective Services does their investigation and finds nothing and the case is closed, the case is closed. But it's all about that education. One of the other things that I do, because I'm a probate judge and I have oftentimes talk about guardianships, is 1102 process. A lot of people don't understand that process, and I don't want to take up time talking about that, but it's a really important process that when Sandy talks about you can get the probate courts involved, you absolutely can. If you believe a person is being is incapacitated, meaning that you think that incapacitation is they substantially are unable to provide food, clothing, shelter, or care for themselves or their finances. So you have somebody that maybe you think has Alzheimer's or dementia that's coming into your bank, and you're seeing them now with a friend that is helping them withdraw large amounts of money. You absolutely can report it to Adult Protective Services, SAPD, and the probate courts. The probate courts will then assign a guardian ad litem to do the investigation to see whether or not this person is actually incapacitated and whether or not they're in a situation where they need a guardianship almost immediately. So that's another option that people don't know that's out there. You can alert the probate courts and we can get an investigation started ourselves.
That's great. And to clarify, Judge Vasquez, too, I know historically when I started in social work in the 90s, a lot of different professions were mandated reporters, but that's changed. And as you said, every person in the state of Oklahoma, I travel too much. I'm in Boston. My family's in Oklahoma. Every person in Texas is a mandated reporter.
Right.
So if you are cleaning someone's house, if you are mowing their yard, if you are a next door neighbor, if you are their attorney and you suspect, you need to report it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Anne, do you have anything kind of to expand on that, on maybe what further steps can be taken and how we can educate, or what, maybe what we need to educate folks on, where you're seeing the lack of education? And then we have a whole list of questions that are pouring in, by the way.
Well, thank you. And just take a few seconds to echo what Sean and Lieutenant Booth and Sandy have said about Judge Vasquez and Senator Menendez, and they're taking the flag of this important issue. For those of you out there in your communities, if you do not have, it really takes strong advocates. I like to call them heavy hitters. You bring these people to the table and they're committed and they're passionate, and they have the ability to bring a lot of people in, a lot of the decision makers in, and so that has really attributed to our success. Adult Protective Services is working with all of these stakeholders and really focusing some of our attention on seniors and persons who are disabled that are isolated in the community. They are easy targets. So isolation is a problematic factor for us because they are vulnerable. And so as some of the examples, when the friend comes into the bank or they've shown up with a new friend, those are red flags for us, and we would you would need to report that so that we can look into it. Changes in behavior, changes in pattern, changes in how they spend their money, their inability to pay their bills when before they were doing just fine. I was reading a report last week about, your neighborhood, and the neighbor was seeing a lot of Amazon packages being delivered to their neighbor's home, who is 84 years old and doesn't even have a computer. And so where were all of these packages? Who were they going to, and who was ordering them? And so with this COVID issue, pandemic, the issue of isolation, which was already an issue, has become even more prevalent. And in these particular situations, they did call in Adult Protective Services, and it was identity theft. And while APS doesn't necessarily investigate identity theft, we do investigate if there's a neglect issue as a result of identity theft. And so just being vigilant, and not only within your own personal community, but in your professional community, to be vigilant and to look for changes in behavior, changes in spending patterns, whether the spending has gone up or the spending has gone down. Those are things that I would say would bring in red flags. And there are a lot of people that are responsible for looking at different parts of investigations. APS plays a role, your local law enforcement plays a role, and your probate courts are partners in this. And there are some entities that don't tap into their probate courts, and they have a lot of, they can be very, very helpful in the prosecution of these cases.
Excellent, thank you. And I of course know that some of our smaller counties of course don't have a dedicated probate court, and so I know we're kind of working through our Adult Protective Services Community Board to possibly, and working with the probate courts to maybe work on a bench card that might be helpful for some of those judges. So Sean Hughes, I have a quick question about, so from the various, since as we talk about folks from various counties and across Texas, large and small, can you give some thoughts and best practices that other counties might be able to use toward successful prosecution of crime. And I'll just kind of toss in there some of the, a couple of folks have asked the question, are there any other counties or regions that are doing any task force like this? Have you all partnered with anybody? Do you know of anybody that's working on this better communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the fact that you phrased it with successful prosecution, because for us to deter, especially repeat offenders that are exploiting the elderly, we need a deterrent, and that needs to be successful prosecution. And so as we've looked around the state, the counties and the communities that are doing this well are the ones that are communicating and they're collaborating. And so I believe, Judge Vasquez, am I correct that several of you went up to Tarrant County or Dallas County?
So Senator Menendez, I know that they were going to Tarrant County to speak to someone, but we had been working with Tarrant County to use them as a model, because I always look to Tarrant County because we go neck and neck with them as far as population is concerned, where we're at in the state. You know, sometimes we have more, sometimes they have more. And so they were seeing a very similar problem. And their probate court judges are the ones that, again, approached the district attorney's office with this issue and said, you know, we really need, this is what we're seeing. We're not seeing a prosecution on the other end, you know, kind of what's happening. They work with their DA, and what they were able to do was work with their DA and their local police department to be able to have adult protective services filed directly with the district attorney's office. So right now, the way that it works in Bexar County is adult protective services will conclude, basically they'll validate that someone is being exploited. They then turn around and give it to San Antonio Police Department or Bexar County Sheriff's Department. And at that point, the law enforcement agencies pick up the ball, and then they take it, if they feel like there's enough evidence there for criminal prosecution, then they take it to the district attorney's office. So when Tarrant County, when they were seeing problems with this, they were not only filing those cases with their police department or sheriff's department, but they were also doing it with the district attorney's office. And that made a huge difference. They did that for a couple of years. They don't do that currently because they created that model, and they started seeing successful prosecutions. Now they actually have a model for these law enforcement agencies to go off of, and they're continuing to see successful prosecutions of these cases. So they no longer have to file directly with the district attorney's office. So that's something we would really like to get in place in Bexar County, where you can do direct file like they did with Tarrant County. We did have an individual that was here before that was working with the district attorney's office. It was solely through a grant that was solely responsible for these types of cases. We no longer have that, where there's one individual that's dedicated to these certain types of crimes at the district attorney's office. We would like to see that again. But again, that's, you know, when we talk about these wish lists that we have to be mindful that with these, what we're asking for comes a dollar amount, right? So it's not just something that we can ask, but we also have to have the money in order to fund these positions, or grants to fund these positions. So that would be the goal. I think that would help with ensuring that these prosecutions.
And I might add that Harris County as well is doing a really good job of bringing everyone together. So what I would suggest for the other various communities of what we've seen so far is to really bring the stakeholders to the table. And so, for instance, as Judge Vasquez was talking about just now, like, let's say you've got another example of that is, let's say you have a caregiver that finds that it has a situation where they suspect elder abuse or exploitation, and they refer it to Adult Protective Services, and then the court gets involved, and then maybe SAPD is looking at it for prosecution, or the district attorney's office. There's a lot of room for breakdown in the communication. And so we're really looking at, okay, what are the places along the way where we're seeing breakdown in communication? What's a common language that we can all use? And if we're meeting together to talk about, especially the higher dollar or, you know, more egregious cases, we make sure that some of those don't get dropped. And so, again, one more plug for this, but I'm so proud of our county because, you know, in Washington right now, it's kind of characterized by some gridlock and things like that. There's a counter narrative going on in San Antonio, and that, you know, elder fraud is not a partisan issue. People from all the agencies, all the groups are coming together to say, not on our watch. We're going to make sure that during our tenure in the respective positions we have, we're going to make sure that we address elder fraud. And again, Judge Vasquez and Senator Menendez have led the way on that. So those would be my comments for other communities.
That's excellent. And so I'm going to feed off of that, Lieutenant Booth. I don't know if you're able to walk us through maybe a successful prosecution that resulted from some collaborative efforts. I know, our DA's office, at least historically, has been fairly proactive. But in that same vein, I'm gonna feed in one of the questions that I see that comes off of what Sean and Judge Vasquez have just said, is that what are some of the best ways to educate smaller law enforcement agencies in these smaller counties who feel that they don't have the resources to pursue these types of cases? So kind of balancing both. Is there something successful, and what can smaller counties take away from that maybe?
You're on mute again.
You're muted still.
I've actually done this before, believe it or not. I've done these.
Thank you.
It's financial crime is not confined. I think we all realize, and especially y'all in the banking community, financial crime is not confined to specific regions or specific locations and locales. It's really regional. And if you don't communicate kind of both in your locale and regionally, you're missing quite a bit. So that's one of the things we're trying to focus on right now with some of these fraud group information interchange things, and obviously the elder fraud task force. Being able to communicate with other jurisdictions about elder fraud and all the other complex financial crime we're seeing. It educates us and it helps us share information about how we're being successful in elder fraud cases and other financial fraud. So I think part of that communication helps us all learn. So I think that would be a good technique for some of these other outlying regions, perhaps, is get involved with us, participate in the communication groups that we have, and maybe even participate in this elder fraud task force. That might be good. You talked about prosecutions, and I just wanted to mention a couple that have occurred in the recent past, and that's a combination. This is a combination of SAPD and APS and the district attorney's office working closely on these. One of them was a conviction in 2019 where the suspect got a life sentence for defrauding a couple of about $139,000. That was close cooperation and communication, particularly between the prosecutors and the investigators that we have on the elder fraud side. And again, if we don't work continuously throughout the process of these investigations with the DA's office and APS, we just can't function well and investigate efficiently. The legal issues are very complex, but the suspect was named Angelica Navarro, and that was just a really good. You just never get or rarely get life sentences on these elder fraud issues, and that was really good to see one of those come through. She had some other convictions on the federal side that created a problem for her for the sentencing portion, so that's probably why we saw that. Another one was a roofing contractor here locally that defrauded probably 60 people, many of them elder, and the DA's office. Again, good cooperation between APS, the DA's office, and SAPD, and that resulted in a very good conviction at the beginning of this year for a lot of contracting fraud related to that. One other issue I wanted to mention is Secret Service and SAPD are working together, and this is not prosecutions or convictions. This is purely asset seizures. But on some of these major wire fraud cases, we're participating directly with Secret Service on seizing funds and not per se working specifically on prosecutions and convictions. And that has, in the last 2 or 3 years, that has kind of exploded. I think last year, the total on the Secret Service side was like 14 million seizures on some of these fraud issues. I know those of us here on the panel in the banking industry have seen this, and it's just a real wave of fraud for the banking industry. industry, but I just want to say that some of these seizures and returns of money to elder fraud victims are happening right now, and sometimes they don't result in prosecutions. But that's been a great focus between SAPD and APS, and SAPD and Secret Service rather, and I think that's really been effective for us.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. So I do want to welcome, thank you, State Senator Jose Menendez. I think we owe you also an apology. I know you've been on for actually a few minutes. We've had some trouble getting you connected. So thank you for taking some time. Senator Menendez, we've been talking about, the creation of this task force, and we've got about 50 folks on the call that are from across Texas, many attorneys, some judges, and then just some other stakeholders. And so we've been talking about, obviously we're blessed in South Texas or Bexar County specifically to maybe be able to pull in some different resources, but looking at some of these smaller counties and smaller districts, what is it that they can do? And so maybe from your perspective, what have you seen, for the creation of this task force? What are your constituents saying is the problem? And just say a few words about how you guys are addressing this.
Thanks, Brian. No, I've been on quite a bit. The problem was I had a link that had me on as a member of the audience, so I got to hear. I've been able to hear quite a bit of the presentation, and it's been very good. So your question was, what are we hearing? I can tell you right now that we've helped many, many constituents in our district with a multitude of fraudulent and abuse issues. Here's a few of them: misleading cable contracts, bait and switch bank loans, mortgage lender fraud, plumbing, roofing, and service contract scams, deceptive professional services practices, medical health insurance swindles, utility imposters, home insurance fraud, store purchase shams, vehicle ripoffs, harassing collection agencies, next of kin power of attorney abuse, family harassment and extortion abuse, last will and testament cheating, caregiver abuse. And we had many, many, many calls and issues and complaints of nursing home and residential issues. And we've engaged many in the financial community through banks like Frost and Broadway. And I mean, I've been listening to all the praise that's well deserved on all of the presenters. I tell you what, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Lisa Centeno. Thank you to Ann Cortez with APS for inviting me and for the work you do to protect our seniors. Thank you to my friend Judge Vasquez for inviting me to help start this task force, the Elder Abuse Prevention Task Force. And I'll tell you, it's been eye-opening, and to see how disturbing, how widespread this problem is across our nation and our state. And so I'm looking forward to working with Sean and others and Lieutenant Booth on what we can do to make this next session one where we can introduce legislation and pass legislation to help with successful convictions. I think that's what we have to do. I think the more successful convictions that we have, the more we'll see the deterrent factor, and we'll see that people will understand that this is a crime. And just as I think I heard Sandy say earlier, just because one time someone gave you permission to do something doesn't mean that you have unfettered access to their bank account. And so that's pretty much it as far as we're concerned. I just want to let people know that our office belongs to all of the people of Bexar County, and we're here to work for everybody. And whatever we can do to help serve and answer questions, please let us know. You can call us anytime at 210-733-6604. And I'm available for any questions, comments, or rude remarks.
No rude remarks, nothing. So that was great, and thank you again, Senator Mendez, for helping to put together this task force, for being one of the co-creators. It's a wonderful thing. And you mentioned, hopefully getting some legislation put forward to help protect folks, and I think that feeds off of that prosecution really, well, at least we hope, is the key. And I know, Sean, you alluded to that in a couple of your previous statements. And I think it highlights, Lieutenant Booth, what you said was that, we never see a life sentence. And I think that just highlights the problem. These extreme prosecutions, or maybe justifiable prosecutions, are the exception, not the rule. And so what legislation do you all see maybe going forward that might help in that? And I don't know, Sean or Senator Menendez, Judge Vasquez, Lieutenant Booth, maybe.
No, go ahead.
Judge Vasquez, you look like you've got something to say.
Well, I know that there was a couple of ideas floating around there. I know that we had one that was for the, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, it was for the Business and Commerce Code. Was that correct? That was brought to us by one of the agencies, one of the state agencies, saying that, there was kind of a loophole in this particular statute that, allowed caregivers to borrow money from the people that they watch. And so I know that for people that they take care of. So I know that was something that we were looking at with the senator. And then we talked to the district attorney's office a little bit about, the penal code and what's too broad, what would be the right fit. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at right now. And again, we have a meeting tomorrow, so hopefully we can, but I know the senators, it's in November, right, Senator, when y'all start filing everything?
So the first day we can file legislation is the day after the election. Obviously, they don't want to waste filing legislation unless you get reelected. So, we all, obviously this is the time where everybody's working on getting reelected, and the day after the election, then you have the right to file, pre-file is what they call it. We're ready. We're ready. We've been working since the day that Judge Vasquez called and said, hey, I've got this idea and I want to work on this. And we're all in. I think that one of the first 2 or 3 meetings we talked about tightening some language that was old language. And I look forward to working with all the financial institutions, with the DA's office, and with our police department. Many times what happens is, in my opinion, is that the questions that Adult Protective Services is looking at asking have to do more with the health and the welfare of the human being, not so much whether there's a crime. If there's a crime towards their safety, yes, but if there's a financial crime, that's a separate thing. So we have to figure out how to work together so that we can provide the police departments and the DA's office documents that already help them finalize an investigation to get us to a prosecution, to get through. And so that's where we want to be. I want to pass something that's significant. I don't want to pass something that's just a Band-Aid or a feel good. I want to make sure that we have something that actually accomplishes something, because there's just too many good people working hard for us not to put people, bad people, like those people that the ghost should take away, those black spirits. They shouldn't get away with this. And so I'm looking forward to doing this. And I love what Sean said too. This is not a partisan issue. I mean, taking care of our senior citizens, this is just a human issue. And we need to address it quickly and swiftly, and be a role model to the rest of the nation on how you do things.
Mm-hmm.
And so speaking of that, Senator Menendez, just how do you feel? We have about 5 more minutes, by the way, and I think we've addressed most of the questions. I will throw one question out there that I think is there a listing of the companies and people that have been found guilty of fraud, kind of a beware list? So I'll throw that out there and let anybody think of that. But Senator Menendez, to stay on this topic real quick, I wanted to make sure, given all the wranglings and the rancor among, certainly our federal politicians, how do you see that the Texas legislature? You would think this is a nonpartisan issue, and you would think that if somebody said someone's hurting your grandmother, that everybody would say, how do I fix it? But do you see that we'll have, do you see any obstacles to getting some decent laws passed, I guess?
So in the many years of experience in the legislature, what I have found typically when legislation has difficulty is when, let's say, something having to go through, whether it's the Criminal Justice Committee or think of the committee that it has to go through. And typically every group has an association. So the DAs have an association, the defense bar has an association, the chiefs. And so if something appears to be problematic by one of those groups, depending on their relationships, it could trip up potential legislation. Where I'll give you a perfect example. When we were working on David's law on cyberbullying, you would think that's a no-brainer. Who would be against that? And unfortunately, there were times where it was such a broad and in-depth piece of legislation that actually touched on 3 different sections of the code, the penal code, education code, and the civil code, that we literally had schools said, well, you're going to make us responsible for things that are off campus, and we don't feel that's important. So they wouldn't say they were against it to our face, but they were working behind the scenes against the legislation. And so when you ask, does this something like this should be a no-brainer? This is why it's important to get all of these ideas out in the open, because whoever is going to be opposed to it, I want them to see the product ahead of time. Take your shots. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what we can fix. Let's get it out in the open. Let's be upfront with each other. Put our cards on the table. And if I can work with you, I'll give you an example. At one point, the David's Legacy Foundation wanted us to create a cause of action in the event that the bully's parents and the child had not stopped, that the victim's parents would have an ability to take the bully and or their parents to court. Well, that cause of action gave the governor's office a lot of heartburn. They didn't want to in other groups. They didn't want a cause of action, so we had to remove that part. So yes, there are, in Austin, Texas, it's much easier to kill bills than it is to pass bills. And this is why it's critically important that we get everything out on the table. And what I'd like us to do is to make our initial foray into this as comprehensive as possible. Put everything out there. Go for the whole thing, because people are going to want to take shots. They're going to want to pull something out. Everybody's going to want to have some sort of a editorial ability. So I'd say we go 100%. We ask for the whole thing, and that gives people something to carve on, so that we're left with something that actually does something. And the other thing is not to lose faith in the system, because sometimes you have to carve things out as you go along. But typically a bill like this, if it's comprehensive enough, it has to go to conference committee, because you never get the same bill between the House and the Senate. And then in conference, you can kind of go back and add some things back. And then you say to them, well, we had to make this change because the House wanted this or the Senate wanted that. And we can put the bill back together. And then when it comes back, you just have an up or down vote. By this point, someone's already voted on the issue. And that's how we put some of the stuff back into the David's Law bill, so that we could make it have some teeth. And we can do the same thing. And I look forward to doing something that makes a difference, because too many of you all, especially these presenters, have worked for so long to make a difference in people's lives. It would be a travesty if we just went up there and did something just to pat ourselves on the back. We might as well just pass a resolution and not put the effort. And I'm not about that. I want to get something real done.
Well, we are at time. I want to be respectful of our audience's time. I want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank all of our presenters. This has been very informative. I appreciate it. We had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 questions come in that we probably didn't get to address, but we will work to get answers out to those folks. I do want to thank everybody. This was the third of our kind of the third of our series through. I've put up thanking our sponsors, the folks who kind of helped make this legal series possible. So we hope to repeat this and continue on just to educate the public. So from the South Texas Adult Protective Services Community Board and all of our other sponsors, I do want to thank folks. We do have continuing education credits. So the CLE course number is 174098028, and you are, this is a self-reporting CLE. If you have any additional questions, you can email Lisa Centeno at dfps.state.tx.us. And please look out, we'll have a post survey that'll come to you probably tomorrow for all of our attendees. So I would like to ask our panelists, first of all, thank you again, but to stay on, we have just a brief Q&A after this. This will end our session. So thank you all very much.
Be safe, everyone.
Thank you, Byron.
Bye.